who is going to do the honours for us, and then we will unveil the panel.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you everyone for coming. I'm really pleased that there are so many people here today, and I've spoken to a few of you, and some of you delivered here and some of you are born here, so I think that's amazing. I asked my father why I wasn't born here, and he said your mother wouldn't have made it because we didn't even make it to the public hospital across the road, and I was actually born in the corridor, so she missed out on all the good things that you had. And I've got a little something to read here, so I'll go again. I want to say thank you very much for Andrea Vincent to be here today, and she will tell you a bit more about what happened here in the history. The panel behind me is actually a result of a community wish. So keep those coming because you never know what you're going to get out of the council, do you? So this is actually to remember the babies that were born here, well actually across the road, as you all will know, because some of you got lost coming here. I'd like to acknowledge the women who actually met at the library last year and told their stories, because actually without those we wouldn't have this panel, it wouldn't have the meaning that it has, and I think Debbie really loved hearing those stories and collating some of those together, and she gave me a little list of some of the history, which is quite interesting, really interesting actually. The Te Rangi Maternity and Surgical Hospital opened in 1915, and it was bought by a group of doctors for the purpose of creating dual maternity and surgical private hospital. The Te Rangi Trust also owned Manuka Street Hospital, and in 1941 Te Rangi became solely used for maternity care and Manuka for surgical care. It was a very busy place, particularly when the maternity care and public hospitals became free in 1939, and Nelson Hospital used Te Rangi as their overflow. When Nelson Hospital leased Te Rangi Hospital in 1956, women would walk into the Te Rangi Hospital and hope that they would deliver there if it wasn't booked up. It closed in 1966, and we've got a lady here who delivered not long before it closed, so that's interesting too. The closure was the start of a closure of many small hospitals across the country, and the start of so many changes in the way that the maternity care is managed today. So what was the attraction here? Food seems to have featured very strongly actually. For example, the memories of wafer thin buttered bread with a 6 a.m. cup of tea, the delicious meals and legendary pumpkin scones. Remember those? Fresh from the oven, or the beautiful garden that people were able to sit in the centre of the large block, which bordered this block over here, as you know, wasn't where we are sitting. The caring staff featured highly in patient memories. We're really pleased to have some memories of Sister Jessie Snow, who unfortunately passed away just in March. She hasn't missed this. She's revealed by very much woman. Initiatives such as the Crown website and panels like these picture our heritage even in a landscape changes and physical landmarks. And Heritage Week is a great time to have these panels unveiled. I'm really pleased to be able to do this because I was born in the city, although I wasn't born here. These panels can only capture a small part of the story, so if you go to the website for the Crow, you'll see a lot more history of Nelson and all the different things around the country, around the Nelson area. Debbie has got some, maybe? Have you got some programs for the Heritage Week? Yes, I've got programs for the Heritage Week. So if you haven't got a program for Heritage this particular year, Debbie has some of those. I'd like to thank you all again for coming and for sharing your stories. And
Yes, I will hold this. Andrea, if you can reach up for that paperclip and that paperclip. Ready? Yep. Go.
Right, now, thank you very much, Gail, for that and for that lovely unveil. And we're going to, I know you'll want to have a closer look soon, but I'm now going to call on Andrea Vincent, who is a practicing midwife, and she's got herself into her earlier uniform with some difficulty, and she will now share some of her thoughts about Te Rangi, because she has done a huge amount of research on this and other maternity care within our region. Andrea.
me, I remembered kind of encapsulated the era that we're talking about, very starchy. And I found out that actually veils, as much as they were revered and the sisters at the time certainly worked hard to gain their veils, they were a pain in the butt. I must admit, when I started my nursing and midwifery, I was very pleased to be into caps because it's the only way I managed to keep my long hair up and keep it tidy. But I was forever getting into trouble when fronting up, and this was a reminder today why I was always getting into trouble, always running late, always still getting dressed as I'm going down the path. So, and I still would be getting told off for necklaces and earrings today. Firstly, I'd also like to take a minute to remember Jessie Snow, who we had hoped was going to be here today, but of course she passed away a month ago. And I had the pleasure of having lots of sessions with Jessie and reading her memories and her book that she wrote for her family, that I felt quite privileged to be able to read. And Jessie really told it like it was, and her book was very much told it like it was. So for a budding author like myself, it was the crown jewels really to hear some of those background stories. And I personally would like to thank her, but and some of the other midwives who have shared their memories as well. With all the health trends, there's always cycles, and around the turn of the century, public hospitals were run by charitable trusts. So there were actually a number of private hospitals that sprung up around Nelson. To get into Nelson Hospital, you had to be virtually destitute or have plenty of money, or be seriously unwell. As a result of that, of these private nursing homes, some were run by trained nurses and midwives, but largely they were untrained. And that all changed around 1902 when nursing became regulated with the Nursing Act, and midwifery followed in 1904. Sorry, flicking the microphone around, right here, all right. In Nelson, at that time in 1904, there were two classes of midwives. There was Class A, and they had some formal training, and we only had one of those, and that was Mabel Watkinson of Fairfield House, and she was our one and only trained midwife at the time. The Class Bs, they had to decide in around 1904 whether they wanted to be regulated or whether they wanted to retire. They had to have 3 years of good experience and be of good character, and that was had to be confirmed by the doctors of the time. Always had the last say, So there were 11 Class B midwives around 1904, and most of those women worked out of their own homes, had women come and stay with them, or went and bought in his own homes. Mabel's mother was probably quite correct when she considered that nursing experience at the time was a glorified domestic, doing work of charwoman, spoiling her hands and learning nothing. Nursing was very basic, and around that time it was all about hygiene. They didn't recognise germs at that time, but it was pre-antibiotics. So the two large killers for women having babies was, of course, infection and hemorrhage. From 1910, there was an increasing number of St Helens hospitals, and that's where midwives then went and did their formal training. Nelson Hospital did become a training hospital for maternity, so for registered nurses could go on and do their maternity certificate, but for midwifery they went on to St Helens. And this training was to improve the care for women and their babies and families, to reduce the mortality rate. Karitani nursing sprung up around about the same time, and that was a specialty to improve the lot of New Zealand babies. This entire block over at the corner where Te Rangi was first owned by Charles Harley Esquire, who was a well-known Nelson pioneer and very successful brewer. And And in 1910, the first building that was put on that block was what became Te Rangi. And it was the home and surgery of Dr. Halifax, who was a South African-born man who was a military background, and he held the rank of Lieutenant Colonel and was a surgeon in the South African campaign. Nelson life was obviously a bit quiet for him because he only lasted here a couple of years, and then Dr. Ernest Nutting took over, and he was English. He'd come from Te Rangi and had had a practice in Inglewood there. His surgery hours was between 9 and 10 in the morning, 2 and 3 in the afternoon, and 6 and 8 in the evening. In between times, however, there seemed to be a reasonable amount of time down at the courthouse trying to recover some of his unpaid fees. And perhaps he had a bit of his grandfather in him as well. He was grandson of Captain Bligh of Mutiny on the Bounty fame. And so Dr. Nutting was also cast adrift a year later and returned to Te Rangi. So in 1913, this property you could have bought for £1,700, and it was described as having 3 sitting rooms, 9 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, good kitchen, wash house, greenhouses and motor shed. The motor shed was becoming increasingly important as the motor car was replacing horses and stables. It didn't sell, however, until 1915 when it was purchased by 4 local GPs, Drs. Andrew, Ben, Lucas and Johnson, along with nurse Ellen Gosling. And Nurse Gosling, she was a matron at Nelson Hospital in 1913, and came to blows with the board when they wouldn't increase her salary by £10 a year to gain pay parity with other matrons around the countryside. So obviously Nelson's always run on sunshine wages and started way back then. That's right. Worries. They keep those on. Where were we? So the Hospital Charitable Trust was of limited means, and Matron Gosling took offence at the comments, and she felt undervalued and resigned. And I tell you this because 100 years later, not a lot has changed. At the time of Te Rangi's opening, many nurses were starting to enlist in World War I, which created a within the hospital, and ironically the Hospital Charitable Trust then offered a supplement to supplement the income of some of the private hospitals so that they could take up the workload. Interestingly enough, Te Rangi wasn't one of those, so obviously local politics was rife then. As a midwife, if you birthed more than one woman at a time on your premises, you had to be a registered private hospital and managed under the Private Hospitals Act and regulations. So Class B midwives generally just provided care in their own home or the woman's home, and if they got caught with the odd fast birth and they had 2 women at the same time, they usually found themselves down at the courthouse paying a fine. Yeah, I know. It's a bit rough, isn't it? Yeah. So Te Rangi was one of those few long-running private hospitals with a few changes along the way. Beatrice Hurst in 1917 was another Nelson matron who left Nelson Hospital and came and ran Te Rangi. She sadly died post-operatively, I think, from probably septicemia. And so in 1920, a widow of another GP, Nurse Mead, took over and took Nurse Gosling's share of the Te Rangi. And Nurse Gosling had a fairly mature age to marry Joseph Robinson, who was a local city councillor. But marriage at any age meant immediate exit from the nursing profession. So her role in life now was to care for her husband. However, if she was widowed, then it was considered acceptable to come back to the profession. Miss Lang was then appointed. We're not going to go through all of them. Miss Lang was appointed in 1923. She stayed there. She was a long stay. She stayed until 1940, and it was in, as Dale has said, in 1941 that Te Rangi combined with the Nuka Street and became Te Rangi Hospital Limited. This also brought a change in the trained staff that Te Rangi now needed, and as it was maternity only, and so every shift had to have a registered midwife. So until that time, the matrons were largely registered nurses, without some had maternity, but very few. And so, as Jessie delicately referred to them, they became dead wood. And today's matrons would probably have a hell of a lot of paperwork that they could keep busy with, but back then they tended to be very hands-on, making sure everyone sat straight and the babies looked neat, and all those important things that they did. The name Te Rangi actually literally means God of the Sky, and Jessie understood that Te Rangi was named after a Maori chief, which there is some evidence that may have been true. However, given some of the stories, I can't help but feel that some of those who were in charge took the name literally and the meaning to heart. And the GPs of the time may have felt that they were running the show, but actually it was very much the midwives. You didn't mess with the midwives.
Right.
Yeah. But they knew their place. Hey, Brian. Your experiences of Te Rangi would vary depending which side of the fence you were on, but for staff and patients alike, knowing your place was basically suck it up and lead a quiet, and this often led to a quieter life. As you rocked the boat, you'd feel the wrath certainly of the sisters in charge. However, they were also very kind and caring, but I always felt when I started 30 odd years ago that you could still feel some of that military influence. And certainly when you look at the uniforms and the epaulets and the medals, and you kind of go, yep, still a little bit military-like. For midwives, Te Rangi, they enjoyed the cosy side of the place and were more relaxed, and especially as it wasn't a teaching hospital, and that took a lot of pressure off the staff. However, many of the nurse aides that worked at Te Rangi went on and did their training. With rising costs and staff difficulties continued to dog Te Rangi, and probably because it was the post-war years, but because also of the post-war years the birth rate was becoming increasingly high. So staff shortages were not surprising given the unsocial nature of the job and the long shifts. There was an expectation that that midwives and nurses would live in, and the nurses' home you'll see from the board was actually on this side, straight out onto New Street. But of course the door out onto New Street was boarded up. You had to get past the matron to get out. And so the nurses' home provided, at least supplemented the poor pay, and the meals were provided. Personally, I found this didn't help the waistline, but the morning teas were always pretty stunning at any of the hospitals, because it was all the morning teas were cooked on site. There was also still an expectation that once engaged staff, became engaged and got married, that they would leave, but there were the odd modern matron who might offer some part-time position until children came along, and then it was expected that mothers would be home with their children. Around 1952, Te Rangi was leased by Nelson Hospital and it became the overflow, as Gail mentioned. The overflow to Te Rangi was actually Nurse Leahy, who was across the road where the garden centre used to be, and she took the overflow. She was actually a Karakani nurse, so we're not quite sure, and her daughter was a midwife, so I think that got her through the public health checks, but she wasn't a registered maternity nurse or midwife. At that time, Te Rangi had a 15-bed capacity, and you probably would all know them by their colours of the rooms, and there were usually 4 midwives on the staff, and each shift had 2 or 3 nurse aides to help out. and they probably did all the work actually during one. In 1966, on March the 18th, the last baby was born at Te Rangi, and I guess that's why I feel a particular affinity with that corner of Nelson, is that I was born in Te Rangi, and I was born on March the 18th, but some 5 years earlier, the same day as the gun twins of Shirley's here. No. So it must have been a busy day. Te Rangi services then moved to Nelson Hospital, and the staff either moved also or they retired. Sister Marjorie Daniels was in charge at the time of the closing, but you could be forgiven for thinking that it was Sister Hall, as she had completed her maternity training but not her midwifery, so was never able to be matron, but she was given her veil in recognition of her experience and long service. Don't know why she wanted it, however. Given today's starchy experience, I'm not sure why, but however, the conversation with an old nursing friend in recent days reminded me that we were all very proud of the uniform, as much as it doesn't fit very well at the moment. And the veils, the stripes, the caps, they may be all gone, and the medals, but we proudly wore them, and we felt that we had won them by the time you'd done those long shifts. And so I guess there's a bit of military in us all. In 1966, the property was sold to Newman Brothers with the intention of becoming the new bus terminal, but this never eventuated. And I was quite excited to think that the hangar was my new birthplace, but but was quite disappointed when the titles and the photos started rolling in and realised that actually it's under the petrol bowsers next door. Yeah. Just as consumers of Te Rangi felt an affinity to the place, so did the staff, like small units like Te Rangi, especially for their single employees who spend a lot of hours in the workplace. It became their own small community with family-like traits, and most of the times, like small families, you have little spats, but most of the time they enjoyed each other's company and provided great support for each other. Let's get out there. And so certainly it was a very warm environment, and that's how Te Rangi Hospital is remembered by most who we've talked to over the time. And so I'd just like to take a moment to thank all those staff who put their best foot forward, who gave all their hours, all their single life, anyway, to Te Rangi. For the midwives that are no longer, I think, unless there's more that have sprung up, probably Jessie may have been the last of the midwives from Te Rangi. They have all passed on. And so it's now for us to grab the stories and get them down in front, because it was certainly a special day.